A lonely nurse, drowning in drinks and memories, faces the impossible. A 500-kilogram tiger terrorizing the town. Between roars, blood, and delirium, she unleashes a hidden strength. What seemed like madness turns into legend. An unexpected heroine, or a monster forever marked by one cursed night. The hospital where Clara worked wasn't a place full of lights or movement. It was a gray, old building with long hallways where the clocks seemed to stop. At night, it felt less like a health center and more like a cemetery of empty beds and silent machines. Only the echo of her own footsteps kept her company. Clara had been a nurse there for years, always on the night shift, always isolated from everyone else. The silence was so deep, she sometimes couldn't tell if she was awake or dreaming. And in that silence, in that loneliness, she had learned to hide a secret. A secret that wasn't written in any medical report or on any control sheet. Buried at the bottom of her locker, under a pile of old papers and a box of torn gloves, lay her faithful companion, a bottle of vodka. Clara wasn't a bad person, nor was she careless with her patients. But the loneliness, the routine, and the memories had driven her to lean on that clear liquid that burned as it slid down her throat. She didn't need much. Just a few sips, enough to forget that the world outside those walls no longer belonged to her, that her life had become a dark tunnel with no way out. Each time she drank, she felt the hospital change. The cold walls seemed to move, the clocks ticked slower, and the shadows stretched as if they wanted to embrace her. Clara knew this wasn't just a habit. It was a chain that bound her, an escape disguised as relief. And still, she couldn't let it go. The bottle was her secret refuge, her weapon against the sadness. Sometimes, while sitting in the break room with the yellow light barely touching her face, she thought about how she had ended up there. She remembered the laughter of her youth when she wanted to take on the world. She remembered her promise to help others, to save lives, to be someone people could trust. But those promises had been buried under years of exhaustion, failed relationships, and disappointments no one else knew about. The bottle didn't ask questions, didn't judge, didn't betray. The sound of the cap twisting had become part of her routine. A secret ritual that gave her courage to face those long nights with no visitors, no emergencies, no one but herself and the echo of the hospital. Sometimes, with her vision blurred, she walked the halls pretending to check rooms. Even when there was no one to attend to, she stopped at the windows and stared into the darkness outside, wondering if anyone in town still remembered her. What Clara didn't know, as she hid the bottle so carefully, was that this very habit would become the spark that ignited one of the strangest and most violent nights of her life. A night when alcohol and fate would join forces to drag her into the unthinkable. But for now, that bottle was only her secret. A secret that kept her standing, even as it slowly pushed her toward the edge. Each sip was a decision, each drink a broken promise. And yet there she was, in the dim light of the hospital, holding the glass with trembling hands, as if it were the only way to survive until dawn. Nights at the hospital were like a play without actors. The stage was set, beds neatly made, machines lined up, hallways lit by cold white lights. But there was no audience and no lead roles. Only Clara, wandering like a ghost through endless corridors, trapped in a place that seemed to exist outside of time. On the night shift there were no visitors, no children's laughter, no families rushing down the halls in panic. Only one or two patients asleep under the effect of sedatives, and she rarely had to do more than change and or check that they were still breathing. Everything else was routine, empty routine, a routine heavier than any real emergency. At first, when Clara had accepted the shift, she thought it would be easy. Fewer people, fewer problems, she told herself. But over the years she discovered the real burden wasn't the patients, it was the loneliness. That loneliness that seeped into her bones, that followed her on every shift like an invisible shadow. It was strange to work in a place where life and death could be decided in seconds, and yet feel as though nothing was happening. The absolute silence became a deafening noise. The tick of the nurse's clock was a cruel reminder that every minute dragged slower than the last. Sometimes, Clara sat at the reception desk and counted the floor tiles, one by one, just to kill time. The hallways seemed longer than they really were. Each corner hid a strange reflection in the windows. Each closed door felt like it was watching her. Clara knew it was her imagination, but on those early mornings, any shadow turned into company. She even caught herself speaking softly, as if answering someone invisible, just so the silence wouldn't swallow her. Sometimes she turned on the radio in the break room, but even the music sounded distant, as if it too were tired of repeating itself. Other times she flipped through old magazines, filled with news that no longer mattered, their dates reminding her how long it had been since anyone cared about that forgotten hospital. The hardest part wasn't the hours. It was the feeling of being forgotten. Clara felt like the whole world kept moving while she was stuck in an endless loop of identical nights. As if her life had been put on pause the day she accepted the job. As if no one would even notice if she never came out again. The emptiness of the hospital mirrored her own. Every deserted corridor was a reflection of her interior. Some days, she couldn't even remember the last time someone called her or came to see her. And in those moments, the hidden bottle became more tempting, more necessary. It wasn't the alcohol itself she craved, but the illusion of something filling that void, even for a moment. Clara had come to believe that the few patients there at night needed her less than she needed them. They were her excuse to not feel useless, even if she knew the care she gave was minimal. The loneliness weighed more than any medical responsibility. It was an invisible burden pressing down on her shoulders, stealing her breath more than a shift full of emergencies ever could. In that atmosphere heavy with emptiness, Clara began to sense something wrong beyond the usual. It wasn't just the routine, or the bottle, or the memories haunting her. It was as if the hospital itself was breathing with her, as if that cold, desolate building shared her grief. A giant of concrete wrapping around her each night, reminding her that she was alone, far too alone, and that this loneliness could break her at any moment. The hospital was still wrapped in silence. After pacing through the empty halls once more, Clara returned to the break room. She dropped into the metal chair, which squeaked under her weight. Closing her eyes for a moment, she took a deep breath and heard the echo of the clock striking 2 in the morning. Another dead hour, another minute lost in an endless night. That was when her eyes, almost against her will, drifted toward the locker. She knew what was inside. She knew that secret was consuming her, but also that it was the only spark of warmth left in so much emptiness. Slowly, as if walking toward an unavoidable fate, she opened the metal door. The rusty hinges groaned, sending a shiver down her spine, as if someone else had heard it too. There it was, the bottle, glimmering under the dim yellow light, half full, waiting for her like an old friend. Clara took it in her hands, felt the cold glass, and without thinking twice, twisted the cap open. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the air, cutting, harsh. She closed her eyes and raised the first sip to her lips. The liquid burned in her throat, searing its way down, and with that fire came the memories. Like doors flung open, images from her past crashed back with violence. They weren't sweet memories. They were demons that had been sleeping, and the alcohol woke them without mercy. She remembered her father, a rough man, always with a cigarette in his mouth and a shout in his voice. She remembered the arguments at home, the slamming doors, the empty bottles rolling on the floor. "You'll never be good for anything," he used to say, with that voice carved into her like a knife. Each word still hurt as if she had just heard it. She remembered her mother too, silent, absent, her eyes lost somewhere Clara could never reach. A woman who never defended her, who seemed invisible, as if fear had erased her from the world. That absence was another wound that had never closed. And it wasn't just her childhood. The vodka also dragged back broken loves. The boyfriend who swore he would stay forever, only to disappear when she needed him most. The friendships that faded away one by one, unable to deal with her shifting moods and constant silence. Every sip was a bitter memory, an open wound that refused to heal. Clara pressed her forehead against the locker, her eyes squeezed shut. She wanted the memories to stop, but the alcohol only pushed them harder. It was like a river overflowing, sweeping everything away. The hospital seemed to vanish, replaced by her childhood home, the shouting, the fights, the broken promises. The tremble in her hands wasn't only from the drink. It was from the weight of everything she had never let go. She had run from her past by studying nursing, by working far from her family, by building a quiet life. But that life had turned into a prison, and now, in those lonely dawn hours, the past came back like a monster she could no longer ignore. Clara knew that first sip would never be the last. It never was. Each time she reached for comfort in the bottle, something inside her awakened. Something dark, full of rage and sorrow. The alcohol didn't free her. It chained her to her demons. And still, she couldn't let it go, because for a few minutes, that burning in her throat gave her the illusion that she wasn't alone. In the locker's metallic reflection, she caught sight of her own face. Tired eyes, pale skin, lips pressed tight. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. It was as if the alcohol had turned her into someone else, a broken version of herself. Clara collapsed back into the chair. The bottle sat on the table, shining like a temptation. Outside, the hospital was silent as ever, but inside her there was deafening noise. Screams from the past, memories of pain, voices that never stopped. And the most terrifying thing was knowing those voices were real, that they were part of her, and that she would never escape them. That same night, while Clara battled the demons of her past in the break room, the town outside stirred with a new murmur. It wasn't the usual hum of streetlights or the distant sound of cars. It was a rumor spreading from mouth to mouth, from house to house, sparking curiosity and fear in equal measure. A massive tiger, nearly 500 kilograms, had escaped from a traveling circus camped on the outskirts. It all began with a scream in the dark. A man on his way home swore he had seen two giant shadows moving in the bushes near the river. He thought they were wild dogs, until a roar froze him in place. The story spread like wildfire. Shops closed early. At the town bar, customers abandoned their drinks halfway to warn their families. No one knew if it was true, but the very thought of it put everyone on edge. The circus had been set up for several days in an open field filled with caravans and colorful tents. People had flocked there eagerly on the first nights, excited to see clowns, acrobats, and exotic animals. Among them, the star was a massive tiger, with golden fur and sharp black stripes, the center of every gaze. Children watched with a mix of awe and fear. Adults whispered about its staggering size. An unexpected storm had struck the night before. The wind tore ropes loose and ripped canvas apart. Some animals, frightened, broke free from their cages. The trainer swore the bars had been secure, but the evidence said otherwise. By morning, the tiger was gone. Only deep tracks in the dirt and claw marks on the wood remained. Afraid of authorities and of losing their audience, the circus staff chose silence, searching on their own. But it was too late. Someone saw them roaming with flashlights and, without answers, assumed the worst. In a matter of hours, the rumor turned into a warning. "Don't go out at night," the baker told a customer. "I heard the tiger is starving," whispered an old woman in the square. Mothers kept their children away from the park. Farmers returned early from the fields. Some men, armed with sticks and old shotguns, patrolled the town's entrances, pretending to be brave though their eyes betrayed their fear. Meanwhile, little news reached the hospital. The few radios in the halls played only monotone music or chatter from distant cities. Clara, lost in her thoughts, knew nothing of what was happening outside. Only later, when she stepped out for some air, did she overhear the guards speaking in low voices. "They say it's huge," one murmured. "Big enough to knock over a car if it wanted to." The nurse looked at them without understanding, her mind still fogged by the bottle. But the word tiger lingered, discordant in her thoughts. The rumors kept growing. Some claimed they had seen the animal's silhouette near the woods. Others swore they had found giant tracks by the riverbank. No one had proof, but every tale fed the next. In a town where nothing ever happened, the possibility of a loose tiger became the most thrilling and terrifying story in years. Some used the moment to dramatize. "It's out for revenge after life in the circus," joked a young man, though his trembling hands betrayed him. Others tried to stay calm. "It won't last long out there. It doesn't know the land," an old farmer assured. But no one dared to go check. That night, lights stayed on late in every house. Windows shut tight, doors barred. Dogs barked endlessly, warning their owners. At the hospital, Clara finished her shift unaware that a real danger prowled outside. Her thoughts were chained to the past and the emptiness consuming her. Outside, however, the tiger's story grew, taking the shape of a giant shadow threatening to step into their lives and change them forever. The next morning, the story of the tiger stopped being just a rumor. The mayor, nervous and pale, called an urgent meeting in the town square. Giant tracks had appeared in the fields near the river, deep marks in the wet soil that matched no animal known in the area. A farmer claimed he had seen something move quickly among the reeds and heard a roar that chilled his blood. No one wanted to believe it, but everyone knew the situation was serious. Local newspapers and radio stations, always eager for a story, wasted no time spreading the alert. "A 500-kilogram tiger is loose in the area," read the bold headline. "Authorities urge extreme caution," added the note. The town's social media pages, once filled with recipes and pet photos, now overflowed with warnings. The news traveled fast, reaching every home, every shop, every corner. The circus could no longer hide its responsibility. The trainer, a bearded man with weary eyes, was interviewed live. He admitted that the storm had damaged the cages and the tiger, frightened, had escaped. He tried to downplay it, calling the animal trained and tame with people, but no one was reassured. Neighbors looked at him with suspicion, blaming him for endangering their lives. A group of men organized a search, armed with shotguns, machetes, and ropes. A few police officers joined them, though none were prepared to face an animal that size. Authorities from the nearest city offered reinforcements, but they wouldn't arrive until the next day. That night, the responsibility fell on the townspeople themselves. Patrols spread across the outskirts, keeping watch over the fields and the roads leading into the forest. Lanterns and headlights lit the darkness, and every sound was taken as a possible sign of the tiger. At the hospital, the news arrived in fragments. A patient who had come in with a head injury, dizzy and nervous, repeated what he had heard on the radio. Clara, who had barely slept after her shift, learned of it from his broken account. At first, she thought it was another small-town exaggeration, but when she stepped into the hallway and saw the staff whispering, she knew something serious was happening. The hospital director gathered everyone. "No one goes out alone after dark," she ordered firmly. "We'll reinforce the doors and lock every outside access. If anyone needs to go home, do it accompanied." It was strange to see so much movement in a place where nothing ever happened. Clara felt a mix of disbelief and tension. Her routine, once defined by silent emptiness, was now filled with a new and tangible danger. Families visiting their sick hurried out, nearly pushing each other aside. A mother hugged her daughter tightly and promised not to return until it was all over. Clara watched the panic from reception. Despite the fear gripping everyone, something inside her stirred with curiosity. How could such a massive tiger be out there? What would happen if she saw it? The thought unsettled her and attracted her at the same time. It didn't take long for panic to turn into chaos. A family living near the hill called in desperation. Their dog had vanished and blood stained the yard. A group of boys swore to protect their street, building barricades with fruit crates. The sound of sirens shattered the calm of dusk as a police car drove through town, warning people to stay inside. Windows slammed shut, curtains dropped. The town locked itself in, terrified of what might emerge from the dark. Meanwhile, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the night carried a heavy air, as though fear itself could be breathed. Clara, sitting by the break room window, watched the sky darken and thought about the stories she'd heard. Her bottle was still hidden in the locker, tempting her. But that night, the fear of the predator outside gave her a different kind of unease. She wondered if the tiger might come near the hospital, if its old walls and usual silence would be enough to keep it out. Out on the edges of town, the patrols searched late into the night. Men signaled each other with whistles and lamps. Suddenly, near a cornfield, one of them found something. A dead cow, torn open with deep claw and bite marks. The sight left no doubt. The tiger was close, and it was ferocious. It was no longer a tame creature. It was a real predator, hungry and out of control. Night fell heavy over the town. The search patrols returned to the center with troubling news and weary faces. People hid inside their homes, praying and peeking through windows in fear. At the hospital, the tension was palpable, though the atmosphere was calmer. Doors and curtains had been reinforced. The outside lights switched off so as not to attract the beast still on the loose. Only a few lamps glowed in the hallways and the break room. Clara sat once more in the metal chair, drew a deep breath, and stared into the void. The hum of the coffee machine broke the silence every few minutes. Her heartbeat seemed louder than usual. She remembered the director's warnings, the stories she had heard throughout the day. Despite her fear, something strange was boiling inside her. A mix of unease and misplaced courage that had started with a sip and grew with every drink. She lifted her eyes to the locker and knew she couldn't face the night without the liquid strength hidden there. She opened the door and pulled out the bottle. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was firm. The cold glass pressed against her lips as she took another long swallow. The vodka burned as always, but this time it didn't just bring back memories. It awakened a new impulse. An impulse that made her feel capable of anything. The fear sown by rumors seemed to dissolve. In its place rose a courage she wasn't sure was real or born of alcohol. She set the bottle on the table, wiped her lips with her sleeve, and smiled, alone in the room, convinced she could handle it all. Clara stood and began pacing the room. She caught her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. "I'm not alone," she whispered, convincing herself. Why should she be afraid? She had endured so much in her life, fought her own demons. An animal didn't seem bigger than the monsters inside her. In the end, which was worse? The creature lurking in the dark, or the one she carried within? The alcohol twisted the question, turning it into a challenge. For the first time in years, her fear turned into adrenaline. With the bottle half empty, her thoughts grew more chaotic. She imagined the tiger, enormous and fierce, standing before her. She imagined her bare hands fighting it, like the old stories she'd heard as a child, tales of heroes facing beasts. Her drink-fueled imagination made her believe she could be the protagonist of an incredible story. Deep down she knew it was madness. Yet she couldn't stop feeling excited by the idea. Delusion began to mix with reality. Clara thought she heard roars echoing in the walls, shadows shifting beyond the glass. Every creak of the building became a stealthy step of the beast. Instead of hiding, she stood firm, as if waiting to face the animal head-on. That mix of courage and recklessness drove her out of the office and into the dark corridors, searching for the source of those imagined sounds. In the distance, a coworker called her name. She didn't answer. In her mind, she was on a secret mission, an explorer hunting prey. She reached a window facing the street. She could see the glow of house lights, the silhouettes of trees swaying in the wind. No one was outside. The street was deserted. Fear had become so thick it seemed to drain the town of people. In that emptiness, Clara felt a surge of power. No witnesses, no responsibilities. Only her and the night. She leaned against the window frame, staring into the darkness. Suddenly, an orange flicker shone in the distance. It could have been a flashlight's reflection, or perhaps the eyes of a beast watching. She didn't know. Her heart raced. Instead of fear, she laughed. It was nervous, but also defiant. The alcohol pushed her forward, refusing retreat. "If you're out there, I'll be waiting," she whispered. The words drifted into the air, unsure if anyone had heard. What was certain was that deep inside, she was starting to believe this was her story, her chance to do something that mattered. The rest of the night, Clara alternated between drinking and pacing the hallways. Her colleagues saw her wandering, speaking to herself, smiling for no reason. Some thought she was simply too tense. Others suspected she had been drinking. None dared confront her. She remained in her own world, blurring the line between the reality of a loose tiger and the delirium of feeling invincible. The night pressed down on the town without mercy. The search patrols returned to the center with uneasy reports and tired faces. People hid in their homes, praying and peering through curtains with fear. At the hospital, tension hung in the air, though things felt calmer. The doors and curtains had been reinforced, the outside lights switched off so as not to attract the beast roaming free. Only a few lamps glowed in the hallways and the break room. Clara sat again in the metal chair, breathed deeply, and stared into the void. The coffee machine broke the silence every few minutes. Her heartbeat thumped louder than usual. She recalled the director's warnings and the stories whispered through the day. Despite her own fear, something strange boiled inside her. A mix of unease and misguided courage that had begun with a sip and now grew with every drink. She lifted her gaze toward the locker and knew she couldn't face the night without the liquid strength hidden there. She opened the door and pulled out the bottle. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was steady. The cold glass touched her lips as she took a long swallow. The vodka burned as always, but this time it didn't just sting. It awakened an impulse she didn't recognize. An impulse that made her feel capable of anything. The fear planted by the rumors seemed to fade. In its place rose a courage she wasn't sure was real or just fueled by alcohol. She set the bottle on the table, wiped her lips with her sleeve, and smiled, alone in the room, convinced she could face anything. Clara rose and began pacing the room. She glanced into the small mirror above the sink. "I'm not alone," she murmured, convincing herself. Why should she be afraid? She had faced her demons already. What was worse? The creature lurking in the dark or the monsters inside her? The alcohol twisted the question into a challenge. For the first time in years, fear turned into adrenaline. Her bottle now half empty, her thoughts turned erratic. She imagined the tiger, enormous and savage, standing before her. She imagined her bare hands grappling with it, like the heroes in the stories she'd heard as a child. Her drink-fueled fantasies made her believe she could be the protagonist of something legendary.